Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, the Canadian Foreign Interference Report has finally been delivered. We'll take a look at some of the key findings and, of course, their significance. Meanwhile, in the UK, the British government's latest report into extremism has for the first time identified Hindutva as a genuine extremist threat. Is this a sign that the UK has finally woken up to what's been going on in India and the evil tentacles of RSS extremism increasingly spreading into the West? And we take a look at how the Khalistan movement has moved away from simple grassroots activism into a mature democratic and legal entity, now making the first formal steps with international bodies like the UN, necessary to establish a sixth sovereign homeland. All this and more on today's show. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and it was a busy day of reading. It definitely is a lot to get through, so we'll have our show today, but I'll bring some other reports to the website or to the Facebook for Savage. So remember, you can find in the link tree all of the different areas where you can find Savage TV. It's everywhere.
Indeed it is. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll be taking a look at loads of your great comments which have been filling up below the video. So thank you as always for those. Right, James, let's get the show on the road. A lot to get through today. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
The much anticipated Commission for Foreign Interference in Canada has released their inquiry report. And although I was expecting it to be somewhat delayed as they went through it and redacted or removed some information for the public, I got it hot off the presses when they released it this morning, so that is good news. Of course, we do know that there is some information that has been intentionally left out due to national security issues and other points of interest that, of course, are very protected, or if there are investigations ongoing, they've got to keep the information confidential at this point to keep the integrity of such investigations. One thing I was disappointed, though, is in the actual press briefing this morning, or yesterday morning, they did not really bring up a lot of names or any names directly or any specific party in terms of the foreign interference. The other disappointment was that it's also got to be remembered that this was specifically geared towards foreign interference in the election process in Canada. So it didn't cover as much as I had hoped in terms of transnational repression. There were some points in there that touched on the Niger murder as well as other very important issues in Canada. But again, that was not the specific goal of this report and this inquiry. So let's take a quick peek at the commissioner. And she released that report this morning. She did this press briefing. I have abbreviated the press briefing just because it was quite a bit longer. And we'll take a look here at that now so that we can kind of get an idea as to the overview and purpose of this report. However, again, it may leave some people wanting more. And that is one of the recommendations that she made, is that there be more of an investigation into the transnational repression and ongoing foreign interference. So let's take a look at what she said this morning.
Was created and I was appointed commissioner in September 2023. I was given a very precise mandate. First, I had to examine and evaluate foreign interference by state and non-state actors and its potential repercussions on the integrity of the last two federal general elections, the way in which related information about foreign interference circulated, and the measures taken in response to this information. Second, I was asked to examine and assess the government's ability to detect, deter, and counter foreign interference in democratic processes and institutions, and to make recommendations for strengthening Canada's protection against such interference. It is important to recall the nature of my mandate, as foreign interference goes far beyond what I was tasked to examine. Foreign interference can affect more than elections and democratic institutions. Just think of universities, scientific research, and private industry. Examining foreign interference in its entirety would have been a giant and almost impossible task, but that was not my mandate. Instead, in keeping with its mandate, the Commission conducted a thorough and rigorous examination of how foreign interference manifests itself in Canada's electoral processes and democratic institutions. At the outset of our work, I pledged that the Commission will carry out its mandate independently, impartially, fairly, and transparently. I will also add with rigor, proportionality, and speed. I believe it has done just that. La Commission devait être disciplinée si elle...
The Commission had to be disciplined in order to meet its deadlines. We could not call every possible witness or introduce every bit of possible evidence. Rather, we focused on the key issues. I'm certain that, at the end of the day, our work has led to a better understanding of foreign interference and of how the government is trying to counter foreign interference. The investigation has also enabled us to identify what the government has done well, as well as what it has done less well. We have also been able to identify ways that we can do better in the future.
La Commission avait...
The Commission's mandate was also to make recommendations to strengthen the protection of our democratic processes and institutions against foreign interference. Our report contains 50 such recommendations. I would like to take a moment to remind you of the various steps in the Commission's work. In January 2024, we started by holding 5 days of public hearings on issues related to the Commission's need to both demonstrate transparency and protect national security. This preliminary work was important because the Commission needed access to highly classified Canadian intelligence holdings in relation to foreign interference. These hearings were very useful, as they enabled us to explore ways of making public information that was not intended to be public in order to inform Canadians. We then met dozens of potential witnesses and identified those who had relevant information, and we identified those who could shed light on the first part of the Commission's mandate. Given that most of the documents and information received by the Commission could not be discussed in public for reasons of national security, I first held 6 days of in-camera hearings. Those hearings were followed by 10 days of public hearings. During these hearings, I heard a total of 98 testimonies. Following these hearings, on May 3rd, 2024, I produced a report setting out my preliminary conclusions.
The Commission then pursued its investigation by seeking to better identify and understand the means available to Canada to defend itself against foreign interference. We obtained access to tens of thousands of documents and conducted over 100 interviews. This led to further hearings during which I heard 143 testimonies over 12 days of in-camera hearings and 20 days of public hearings. I also had the benefit of meeting and hearing from over 100 citizens from various diaspora communities who have been victims of foreign interference, particularly transnational repression. They shared their experiences with me, allowing me to better understand the human impact of this scourge. Finally, Nearly 40 experts helped me consider the best ways to conduct this battle. Now, what must we retain from the Commission's work? Firstly, that certain foreign states are attempting to interfere in our electoral processes and democratic institutions. This is not a new phenomenon, nor should it surprise us. States have been trying to interfere with each other since the dawn of time. What is new, however, are the means being deployed by these states, the extent to which the phenomenon seems to be taking hold, and the fact that it is being talked about publicly. That said, and it is one of my most important observations, our democratic institutions have remained robust in the face of attempted foreign interference. Although there are a very small number of situations where foreign interference may have had some impact on the outcome of a nomination contest or the result of an election in a given riding, foreign interference did not impact the outcome of the last 2 general elections. Although a few situations involving attempts to curry favor or develop problematic relationship with the parliamentarian have come to light, such phenomena remain marginal and so far appear to have been largely ineffective. Some may have benefited from the support of a foreign state, sometimes without knowing anything about it. But again, so far, this does not seem to have led to any real gains for the states involved. Nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament. While I saw evidence of some concerning behavior, the evidence does not show any MPs plotting with foreign states against Canada's interests.
As you can see, that the overview of the report is very much focused on political implications. And some of the key points there is that she has stated that although she does not feel that there is a direct result in, or a direct impact on results of former elections, there are concerning behaviors that need to be addressed or to be further looked at. Also, that some individuals have benefited from foreign states, although they seem to be overall ineffective in their goals. And that would include China, India, Russia, Iran, and others. So, of course, that brings into light the further need for further investigation and inquiries. But I think that this is a huge jumping start in terms of where we're at. Now, this report, of course, a lot of it was done, the interviews and other appearances before the commission were done in open camera and actually live streamed, but there were a lot that were also done behind closed doors, still on camera, but not for the public. And again, as I stated at the top of the story, that had a lot to do with national security implications. Now, whether or not there are names attached to the concerning behavior, names attached to those who may be benefiting from it, I still have to do a deep dive into the report because it is thousands of pages and I just received it today and it was just released today. So I'll have more information going on. But let's take a look at some of the points that I thought were important that she had brought up in terms of the foreign interference. And we'll take a look at that before we talk about further concerns about the manipulation of media and public perception. Now, when we look at this inquiry, of course, it is, again, Honorable Hogue that presented it. And it says that Canadians need to be better informed about what intelligence is and the significant limitations it entails. So again, just reiterating the importance that Canadians be better equipped to recognize and to deal with this misinformation and make sure that the false narratives are not just continually thrown out there and just blown up by the people who do not do their research and understand that they're being played. Now, the Commission's experience, it goes on to say, has shown that a great deal of information can be made public without compromising national security, as several witnesses from the national security and intelligence community who appeared before the committee had readily acknowledged. So there is a certain level, and that's one of the issues that she brought up, was transparency in making sure that Canadians have informed information and are aware of the actions that are being taken by potential foreign agents and foreign parties. But at the same time, we have to really respect the national security and the need to keep some things quiet. So it's a very delicate balance, and that's one of the things that she touched on, was that there needs to be balance, but there needs to be more information flowing. And that leads me to another point that she brought up, is that she also stated that there is a breakdown in communication and the passing of reports and items, memos, and such of concern when it comes to getting to the PMO's office or other MPs, the national security offices, and that is where there's a communication breakdown. Some files are being forwarded and they're left sitting on a desk or filed without the proper due care and attention that they should receive. And she brought that up as well. So these are areas that definitely can be improved upon, and hopefully with this report coming out, they will make new processes or put in place new processes to ensure that that happens. Now, some spread disinformation about candidates and elected officials who express views that diverge from their own interests. Their goal is to try and prevent these candidates from getting elected and to affect policy choices and positions. And that's something that we've talked about a number of times, Angus, and that is the impact of the different disinformation, the financial compensation or the financial support that comes in through third parties. And of course, there are laws to protect us against that in Canada when it comes to the democratic process. But we know that there are ways that they find loopholes to make that work, or just do it completely under the guise of a Canadian citizen that is redirecting money sent to them from different governments or different entities around the world. Something also important is that disinformation can sometimes be directed at political party as a whole, as appears to have been the case in 2021, when the Conservative Party of Canada, under the leadership of Erin O'Toole, was the target of a disinformation campaign, though the evidence could not establish a definitive link to the People's Republic of China. So they specifically insinuate there, but don't have the definitive evidence to put forward on that. But again, it's reading between the lines as to what they're allowed and what they're not allowed to say, and also when it comes to international geopolitics and diplomacy. Now, disinformation is also used as a retaliatory tactic to punish decisions that run contrary to a state's interest. This may have been the case with the disinformation campaign that followed the Prime Minister's announcement regarding suspected Indian involvement in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And again, they put, though no definitive link to a foreign state could be proven, and that is important to keep in mind that in Canada, of course, with most developed nations, the rule of law dictates that they are innocent until proven guilty, and all of the evidence has been provided within the judicial system. So again, it's almost just a caveat to cover their butts on that one. So once again, we also look at the other paragraphs here. There's so much here that I don't want to cover it all because we'll be here all night. And as I said, I will delve deeper into the entire report to bring up more information and more focused points of interest to our audience and to others. But it's also stating that disinformation is difficult to detect and above all to counter, since the technological means available evolve at a breakneck speed. Now, we all know that. We buy a cell phone, and by the time we get to our car and make a call, it's now outdated, and Samsung or Apple are releasing a new version. So we know how fast technology changes and advances. It is noxious and it is powerful. It poses a major risk to Canadian democracy. If we do not find ways of addressing it, misinformation and disinformation have the ability to distort our discourse, changing our views and shape our society. In my view, it is no exaggeration to say that at this juncture, information manipulation, whether foreign or not, poses the single biggest risk to our democracy. It's an existential threat. And that we've talked about many of times, Angus, is the power of the social media platforms and overall internet platform, because of the fact that it is so easy and it is inexpensive to wage these campaigns of misinformation, lies, and deceit. So, and really, I mean, they've got psychologists that work with the information technology departments of foreign governments that know what words, what pattern of words, what phrases are going to trigger the most emotion from the viewers and get them stirred up to not only continue sharing and posting, but also to create that overall emotional response and create that distrust, that anger, or manipulation in the way that they want it. So it's very important to keep that in mind. And it goes on to say that, but what I have learned about it is insufficient for me to sound the alarm that the government must take seriously and consider ways to address it. My understanding is that this is underway. And again, it's because of the fact that it is such a focused report on the election system and the election process that she couldn't go into all of these other areas that I think are very essential to be looked at as well. Now, she had a year to do this report. She had tens of thousands of documents to go through. She had hundreds of people to depose. And so, yeah, it seems like a long time to compile a report, but when you are dealing with the vast amounts of data, with the vast number of people, with the different levels of agencies, whether it's the RCMP, CSIS, or others, I mean, it really is a time-consuming and laborious job. So hats off to Marie-Jose Hogue. She was the commissioner that brought this report forward and led the committee throughout this process. It has been long and arduous, I'm sure, for all of those involved, and not to mention the frustration I'm sure that they met at some points wanting certain information that just couldn't be shared for logistical purposes or for security reasons. But I think overall it was a very cooperative report. I think that it is a benefit to Canadians and also the world, because now the other countries such as the UK, the US and such can use that as a framework to look at how the foreign interference is playing a role within their communities and how social media and other media platforms are being used to manipulate the overall society and the Western world, Angus.
Yes, I think what I found most interesting about this report is actually not so much what was said, it was what was not said, interestingly. And I would preface what I would say with the lesson that I've learnt in my long life, certainly here in the UK, and I have no doubt it applies equally across North America, is that in the history of public inquiries, of whatever form they take, never in the history of public inquiries set up by the establishment have they ever ruled against the establishment. So in the context of that, it's very unlikely that any public inquiry will ultimately find fault or any negative, certainly anything with a significant negative impact upon the establishment itself. So I think with that in mind, you've always got to enter interpreting what is said with these things, knowing that probably if there is something really damning against a state failure, they're not going to highlight it, or if they do insert it somewhere in the report, it's going to be buried, or at least it's going to contain such euphemistic language that the state will not actually be found at fault, when in fact it probably is. So that's, I think, the context with which to approach this. And I did find it interesting, of course, as I said at the beginning, that there's a lot not said in this. And she made, and to her credit, she did say very clearly, the terms of my mandate are very precise. The parameters within which I'm reporting are very limited. It is literally only looking at the electoral process of the last election. That is only what she can look at and finding any issues relating to that. She said that I could not look into other areas where clearly there may well be significant interference, and that includes the academic sector, universities, that includes the scientific fraternity, that includes private industry, the industrial sectors. In other words, these huge areas of society where actually we do know and often report on clear interference from India and the RSS, etc., particularly in academia. So she said that, and I can't look into those areas. And again, it's by what she's not saying. In other words, I can't investigate those areas, but by implication, clearly there is a lot of interference going on in those other areas. So that, I think, in itself was very significant. She also said that she held at least 6 days of investigations in camera, that is, not in the public eye. In other words, clearly she's had to delve deep into the bowels of Canadian intelligence agencies, into the intelligence fraternity, and areas that really is not in the public interest to be revealed, which in itself, again, implies that there's some dirty business going on, not on the Canadian side, but it involves a dirty business under the surface, which obviously involves Indian intelligence as well. In other words, this is not anything that's in the public domain, anything that's in public discourse. It is obviously going on beneath the surface, which again implies by its very definition that it is secretive, clandestine, and shouldn't be going on, etc. I think that in itself. Also, the fact that there are large parts of this report that are redacted, that is, removed from public eye, again implies there's stuff in here that they don't want the public to know, that it, by extension, again implies there's dirty business going on, etc., etc. And also it implies that there is so much going on there that we can't tell the public about because it's ongoing. In other words, our mandate, whilst it's restricted here, there is clearly a lot more going on than we can tell you, but we just can't report on it now yet, etc. So again, it's not what it's what she's not saying again. What she did say, she said that she has uncovered that a lot of this interference from foreign nations, what is new about it are the means that are being deployed. In other words, using new methods, obviously new technologies, new methods. So this is new. This is a new era of disinformation, of interference, of influence, etc. So that was interesting. What's new also is the extent. So this isn't limited just by the fact that she said the extent of it is new. In other words, it's increasing, it's large, it is significant. That was interesting. And of course, she said it is now, what's new about this is it's being more publicly discussed. It's being publicly discussed because it's becoming so obvious and so overt. I think that in itself is very interesting. In other words, what India and of course China and Russia have been up to is so obvious and so significant that it's actually hitting mainstream news. Hence why this inquiry had to be instituted in the first place. That was important. Now, on the downside, I suppose the negative side, the disappointing side, is that she was very clear to state, look, in the findings, we didn't actually find that there was significant interference. What she did find was, in her words, it was ineffective. Yes, there were some individuals who have benefited from outside influence. By that, obviously, read probably financial incentives and other incentives, of which these individuals have benefited. One assumes these are the MPs that we often talk about. But she says they were also in ignorance, so they might not have realised that they were being unduly influenced by a foreign nation. And she said that they actually, the ultimate result was these foreign nations, India, did not actually gain anything by their influence. And she said there were no traitors. There was some concerning behaviour, but she didn't find any direct plotting with India. So, yeah, I think that's good news and bad news in some degree. It's good news, in fact, that India is not succeeding, at least on the face of it, in influencing Canadian politics. But actually it's disappointing in the fact that actually it's likely that they are. It's just that this report, this investigation has not uncovered what's really going on. And particularly in this electoral process only, there was no obvious evidence that she has uncovered. That doesn't mean it's not there, but it also means only in this process, only, she didn't uncover it. But again, I refer back to what I started with. What about academia, where the influence is that obvious that we talk about it regularly? In the scientific fraternity, it is clear and going on in the technology field, but also in industry as well. Again, that clearly does show signs of interference, etc., etc. And just generally across society, just across social media, across all the platforms, media platforms, etc. Again, she didn't even mention those sorts of areas, which clearly are heavily influenced by a large resource coming from India. So yeah, James, I think to summarise, I think good points, bad points, a little bit disappointing to some degree, and it didn't come up with the smoking gun that we've been looking for. But as I said at the very beginning, I think it's not surprising that the Canadian government would admit to its own failure in its electoral processes and its own governance, that it would overtly admit, oh yes, we've failed, India has influenced our election, because the implications of that would almost be too serious for Canadian governments going forward.
Absolutely. And considering that we do have an election coming up this year, it's whether or not the question is whether or not there are very clear implications or other things that are buried in this report that they didn't want to come out with the initial press release and give those headlines, given where we're at this time. So, of course, we have to keep that in mind, that we do have an election coming up and that there's going to be a lot of manipulation and interference attempts that are going on. But there's not a great deal that's going to be changed or safeguards that are increased before that time and before this election. Now, the RCMP and CSIS have clearly stated that they will be increasing monitoring to an extent, but not a lot of procedural or regulatory changes are going to come into place. Now, as I said, this is over a 1,000-page report. It just and then you take into the supplementaries and everything. So it's going to take me a bit of time to get through it, but I definitely will, and I will make sure that we bring more information as I can bring it all apart. But let's keep in mind how serious that foreign interference can be, and let's take a quick peek at the Trump government. Now, in the last few days, he and tech giants have been talking about ChatGPT and the influence and the huge financial benefits to the U.S. of different AI programs, data centers, and so forth. And then just days later, the Chinese comes out and announces their massive, what they call a breakthrough in AI technology, and that's through a program called DeepSeek. Now, this in one day shaved off almost $1 trillion of finance from the markets and potential investments. So that in itself is a way that China or certain individuals may be targeting the U.S. in a financial implication and an influence of financial means to knock down the economy in a very real and impactful way. Now, I do anticipate that as the markets settle down, they will regain most of that territory lost, because let's face it, it's a product coming out of China, and there's a reason why we're not driving Chinese cars on our roads here, because the quality is inferior, and that is very important. Now, tonight I was going to go continue on with a story about the potential for manipulation of ChatGPT and other AI, but we'll leave that. I'll bump that to tomorrow night, just in the lack of time for tonight's show. But stay tuned tomorrow night. It's a very interesting story to continue on with about the foreign interference and AI technology. And we'll have some actual video from IBM, from some of their people who are involved in AI research in ChatGPT, and the concerns of manipulation and data bias. So we'll talk about that tomorrow night, Angus, and I'll hand it back to you.
Indeed, yes. That's obviously a huge story. It's hit the mainstream media over the last 24, 48 hours. So it'll be interesting to talk about that. Okay, James, let's move on then. And I'm going to talk about my first story. And this here in the UK, there's been the government commissioned a report recently into extremism. Extremism has obviously been a very hot topic here in the UK for quite some time. And so the government commissioned this report into extremism, which was written by, I have to say, a very left-wing think tank. And this report, the findings of this report have actually been leaked. One wonders if it was leaked deliberately. These things tend to be leaked deliberately in these situations. But what was interesting about this particular report, it's not very black and white. It's not very clear cut. There are a lot of nuances here. We've got to be very careful how we view this report. But one specific element of this report is very relevant to us and our channel and the things we talk about here. And there are a lot of nuances in this report, which, again, we don't really have time to sort of discuss all the nuances, but I want specifically just look at one part of this report, and that, of course, relates to Hindutva and Hindutva extremism, because, yes, this report actually, for the first time, actually highlights the existence here in the UK of, and literally it named it, Hindutva extremism. Now, the various news outlets have covered this to some degree, but The Guardian, as always, which has always been very good on subjects like this, particularly subjects relating to the minorities and, of course, particularly the Sikh minority. The Sikh minority here in the UK, they've written a very, very useful and very good article, as always, very well researched article about this leaked report. Now, I'm just going to just pick a few points out that they brought up in this article. As I said, there's a few nuances here which we'll discuss shortly. But they said that it was headlined, "Misogyny Identified as a Breeding Ground for Extremism in the UK," says this leaked report. Misogyny, of course, being hatred of women. This is male hatred of women. That's the definition of misogyny. And it says Hindu nationalism, misogyny and the manosphere that they've coined as a phrase have been identified as breeding grounds for extremism in this leaked report. The Home Secretary's rapid analytical sprint also dismissed claims of two-tier policing as a right-wing extremist narrative. That's something I'll talk about briefly in a moment. It argued that the authorities should adopt a behaviour-based and ideologically agnostic approach, in other words, don't be partisan or take sides on this, to clamping down on extremism rather than focus resources primarily on ideologies of concern. But what it did say, this Yvette Cooper, our Home Secretary, commissioned this rapid review last August, and for the first time it identifies Hindu nationalist extremism and Hindutva as ideologies of concern after unrest in Leicester in 2022. These were riots, actually. This is disturbances that happened between the Islamic population of Leicester and resident Hindus from the Indian diaspora. There was a lot of argy-bargy, as we call it here in the UK, and it did actually spill over into a little bit of violence. Hindu nationalist extremism is an extremist ideology that advocates for Hindu supremacy and seeks to transform India into an ethno-religious Hindu state. Hindutva is a political movement distinct from Hinduism, which advocates for the hegemony of Indian Hindus and the establishment of a monolithic Hindu Rashtra or state in India, the report said. Tensions between Hindu and Muslim communities in the UK are still evident, and events in Leicester show how disinformation can play a role in offline action, it said. This is really significant. It's set out in this report very clearly, very unambiguously, what Hindutva is. It's a political movement distinct from Hinduism, advocating for this Hindu Rashtra. Hindu nationalist extremism is an extremist ideology. Really, really important definition there that has been recognised by this report, by the writers of this report, now in front of the British government. It's in black and white. It's unambiguous. There's no hiding behind anything now. So they've been warned by this think tank of what's going on. The report also says the activity of grooming gangs is frequently exploited by the far right. And grooming gangs, of course, associated with the parts, I've got to be careful what I say here, it's a small part of the Islamic population that's been linked to grooming gangs. And I would again highlight the fact that it's a Sikh community who 30 years ago were highlighting the existence of this going on, that they were ignored by the British government, that it was going on, but it wasn't the right-wing extremists, should we say, that are being labelled now as highlighting and leveraging this argument about grooming gangs. It was actually the Sikh community itself that highlighted to the British government and the British law enforcement that this was going on. They were ignored at that time. It goes on to say right-wing extremist narratives, particularly around immigration and policing, are in some cases leaking into mainstream debates. Claims of two-tier policing, where two groups are allegedly treated differently after similar behaviour, is a recent example. The government's approach to extremism should no longer be based on specific ideologies of concern, but on behaviours and activity, etc., etc. And it goes on. There's a lot of very arcane language, and again, there's a lot of nuance here, which I think I'll just quickly summarise without getting into too much detail in this report. But basically, and I think this is very relevant to the Sikh community. Now, first of all, the first element of this is, of course, highlighting the fact that Hindu extremism, Hindutva nationalism, this extremist nationalist agenda, is existent in the UK. It is being spread across the UK by agents of Hindutva. Finally, the UK government has been made aware of this, so it can no longer hide behind whatever it's been hiding behind in the past to ignore its existence. I think it's not naive. It knows it's there. It's just deliberately ignored it, and it's continued to work with India to target the Sikh community, despite the fact now in black and white that it's being set out to them, look, this is a Hindutva agenda, this is an extremist agenda that is pushing you, the British government, into targeting the Sikh community. So hopefully this report is going to make it very hard now for Starmer's government to again turn on the Sikh community, because the Sikh community and others can now turn around and say, look, this agenda is being driven by extremists. You've been highlighted, you've been advised and warned by your own report, Commission report, that this agenda is being pushed by right-wing extremists. Now that is really important, really significant, and that is a fantastic thing, I think, that this report has come out. And the fact that it's been leaked, I think, is very interesting. It brings it up its own questions. Why has it been leaked? But the fact that it has brought into the mainstream media the existence of the RSS, the Hindutva extremism, and now the British government can no longer deny that it exists, and the fact that it is being influenced by it, and of course it is represented by the Indian government, etc., etc., etc. That's really important. Now, nuances, and I'm going to touch on this very briefly because it's a very complex subject here in the UK, particularly within UK politics, but it's relevant to the Sikh community. Keir Starmer's government is in danger of becoming authoritarian. This is an accusation that's been thrown up regularly from all sides, actually. Even from the Labour Party and Labour supporters themselves are saying, look, there is this two-tier policing going on. And this report is highlighting the fact that this two-tier policing is being leveraged as an argument. Firstly, well, this report claims that it's the right-wing extremists that are using this argument to attack the government, etc., etc. But in fact, there is two-tier policing. It's undisputable. I'm sorry. The government tries to deny this, but there is two-tier policing going on here in the UK. It's unambiguous. It's going on. It's very clear. And what it's being used for is the government is politicising the police force, saying, OK, we will police some protests one way, and we will police other protests another way. Now, the anti-immigration protests and protests against issues related to that have been blanket branded as right-wing extremists. They're not right-wing extremists. They actually come from all parts of the political spectrum. They come from people who are arguing against immigration. Keir Starmer's government have policed these brutally. People have been fast-tracked to prison who've actually been out there protesting, as is their democratic right, saying to the government, you've got to close the doors to immigration, it's destroying our nation, etc., etc., whatever arguments. It doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong, they have that right to protest, but they have been fast-tracked to prison for that. Yet we have, for example, Palestinian protests that are not policed in the same way, or LGBTQ protests that are not policed with the same brutality and attention, etc. So that's been used. Now, this is particularly relevant to the Sikh community. Why? Baz News reported on this. A very, very intelligent article was released, I think about a year ago. We did report it on the time, where members of the Sikh community have picked up on this, saying, look, you do realise that this can be used against us as a community. This totalitarian viewpoint, this stance by the Starmer government and before it the Conservative government, if you are policing these protests in different ways and you are saying, look, we're going to police some protests with a light touch, but we're going to really brutalise other protests, we're going to lock you up if you dare take to the streets protesting about certain subjects, that's not democracy. And the Sikh community, who are known and renowned and well reputed for their stance against injustice, often take to the streets, as we report on a regular basis. The Sikh community are vulnerable to this two-tier policing, because if the British government don't like what the Sikh community are protesting about, they will brutally clamp down on those protests. They will fast-track Sikhs to prison. So, for example, I'll take a simple example. Sikhs take to the streets protesting about Indian transnational oppression. If Starmer's government thinks, you know what, don't like this, let's fast track these guys to prison, that can be used and abused against the Sikh community. This is why the Sikh community needs to stand up to issues like this. And this is very nuanced because, of course, there is right-wing extremism. There is also left-wing extremism. It doesn't matter. The point is that the British government is abusing the situation, is being very shrewd in how it's interpreting all the rules, and it's manipulating the rules of so-called democracy to push its own political agenda, an agenda that is moving dangerously towards totalitarianism. It's reflecting what's happening in India. It's misusing the laws to push a political agenda that suits its own interests and not the interests of democracy and the people. And that's what's happening here in the UK. We're keeping an eye on it. We're reporting on it. It is happening. The Sikh community, of course, recognise it as well. Well done to the Sikh community for recognising that these same laws that are clamping down on protests can be used against legitimate democratic protests, whether it's for Khalistan, whether it's anti-India, whatever. But we've got to be very careful, and we've got to call out our own governments as much as we call out India and its government for its totalitarian actions. If our own governments, James, this is really important, if our own governments are abusing the laws of our own lands and clamping down on freedom of speech, clamping down our right to democratically protest, all of us must unite and stand up against this. It's very important that we hold our own governments to account. Oh, I think you're on mute again, James.
Here, I didn't want my chair squeaking in your video, or in your comments. But at the end of the day, when we look at the misogyny, we see that as a big issue that is happening around the world. It seems to be increasing. But also when it comes to, as you pointed out, the authoritarianism, and the one big thing that I looked at that you said was the policing of the protests. Now, we've seen some... I got to be careful how I word this, because I get very annoyed by some of the protests, such as the Palestinian protests that were happening at UBC, at the University of British Columbia, where they fenced off areas of the university and they didn't allow people in or out of those areas except for if you were on their side. And the police kind of took a step back from that. They didn't really move in and do a lot, or the university. So it was a very delicate one, but at the same time, throughout Canada, they were going in immediately to break down these camps and these I would say almost, these residences that were set up, because it was like a little community. And as I said, some of the universities and some of the police forces in Canada treated them a lot differently than they did in areas that are a bit more open or flexible, or ignorant of some of the facts. And then you look at how some of them got away with vandalizing Canadian historic sites. And, again, those areas, the police didn't step in and press charges for vandalism and acts against federal property. And then if you look at the truckers' convoy and how that was handled, I mean, it's a totally different level again. And I was totally against the truckers' convoy. I was out there reporting on it in a fair and professional manner as a journalist. But my personal opinion was that it went too far. But at the end of the day, how it was handled, I don't think was appropriate. And I think that on the other end, the lack of control and the lack of policing on some of these other protests is the other extreme level. So that just kind of gives in context for our Canadian viewers what you're talking about when you bring up about how it's policed in the UK, and that we have the same issue here in Canada. And I think that'll give a better visualization of that, Angus.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that, James, because I think we're entering a new era. In certainly here in the West, where traditional lines of division are breaking down. I think political lines are breaking down. And I think it's almost becoming a bit of a them and us situation. It's almost like, and often refer to the ruling elite. And again, there's choose your conspiracy theory of choice. But ultimately, it's very, very clearly there is an element of authoritarianism creeping into the West of this ruling elite. And I think this is breaking down a lot of the traditional political divisions between left and right. And I think no longer, almost certainly here in the UK, and I suspect it's the same in North America to some degree. And I suppose even the Trumpism era is symbolic of this. Is that quite often and certainly here in the UK, we are seeing the two main political parties, you can't slide a piece of paper between them. Their policies are so almost identical that there is no left and right in British politics. There is a uni-party, as we call it, Labour and Conservative. They're as bad as each other in simple terms. And what we're finding is that traditional left-wing supporters are actually no longer supporting the left-wing government because it actually doesn't represent them. This government is actually representing something else. What that something is, well, that's open. That's where the conspiracy theory comes in. And I think the Trudeau government was to some degree, and I think certainly talking about the truckers, I think that was a very interesting symbolic situation where, again, it was all about authoritarianism. Where did that come from? We often talk about the World Economic Forum. Is that the root cause of certainly their advocates like Trudeau, like what was her name in New Zealand, even Macron's another example. These are all alumni, should we call them, of the World Economic Forum. So the conspiracy theorists are saying that there is this globalist elite taking charge of our governments, and that ironically is uniting the people on the left and the right of the people, the low-level grassroots people, are uniting from all sides of the political spectrum and say, look, hang on, this is not what we're about in democracies. There shouldn't be a ruling class and the rest of us. We actually should be divided between left and right in simple terms. So I think, James, it's a very interesting era that we're entering in. I think the traditional political lines are breaking down, and even the democratic fundamentals seem to be breaking down.
Yeah, and it just seems to be something that we're seeing. And again, it's also the use of the social media, and that influences that we are getting more information. We're getting just lambasted with all of the different videos and the photos and the feeds. And, so again, it really goes to light the fire or fuel and fan the fire in the flames, Angus. So, yeah.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely. It's interesting times, and I do often talk about extremism on both the left and the right, but actually it does go full circle where they actually meet in the middle, and then it will meet at the top of the circle. In the left-wing extremists are just as extreme as right-wing extremists, and that in reality is defined by fascism. They are the fascists, whether they're left-wing or right-wing, but they are the ultimate fascists, and that's what we do need to keep an eye out for. Okay, James. In the interest of time, we are running out of time incredibly. We've had two big stories. So I think I'm going to drop my story about the Khalistan movement moving into a more formal entity until tomorrow. Let's discuss that one tomorrow, and I'd like to go, if we may, onto our comments section. So do keep an eye out for tomorrow's show, when we'll talk more about AI from James, and then more about the Khalistan movement's move into a more formal entity in tomorrow's show. So do keep an eye out for that. But for today's show, let's take a look at loads of the great comments that have been pouring in. Loads of comments from all of you. Thank you, as always, to each and every one of you that have commented. Loads from our regulars, as always. Thank you so much for those. And loads of new faces, so welcome to our channel, and thank you for your comments that you've contributed. Right, so Modi Drink Moot talks about, when we talked a few days ago, James, about Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon actually turning up. The Sikhs for Justice were invited to the inauguration ball, and Dr. Sandhu, funnily enough, who I interviewed last week, he was actually there at the ball too. He was present in that group from Sikhs for Justice. So there were quite a large group invited to that inauguration ball. And Modi Drink Moot says, Pannoon always manages to get into these places. Ha ha ha. He leaves the Indian media and shaking, which I think is true. I think Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon, and indeed the whole posse from Sikhs for Justice, they really, I have to say, they're a very effective group. They really have. They haven't just achieved an awful lot. They've done this. I think they're very well connected. And this is what India, I think, is why they're so scared of Pannoon and Sikhs for Justice, is clearly they are really well connected. They've got themselves invited to this inauguration ball. That is how significant they are as an entity, James.
Absolutely. And I mean, as you said, I mean, just invite Pannoon. He's going to bring entertainment. I mean, he is just a firecracker of energy and just has a presence about him that just commands a respect, and that's really cool. And of course, as you said, Dr. Sandhu, I've met him myself here in Surrey. What an amazing guy. Like, I just have nothing but respect for these guys. Sometimes I think that Pannoon goes overboard, but hey, he gets the job done. So, it is what it is, right?
Indeed, yeah, and Pannune does have his critics within the community itself. They think he's a little bit too over the top. But as I keep saying, look, there is a place for somebody like Pannune. That we've got lots and lots of very serious, credible commentators and activists. But there's always a place for somebody like Pannune because he appeals to a different part of the community. He appeals to different parts of the potential audience. For example, the young who like this bit more of the in-your-face, bombastic rhetoric. That's what they respond to. That's what they engage with. People like us, James, I think we struggle to understand what the youth engage with. And I think that's partly where Pannune, I think that's where he fits in.
I agree, Angus, I agree.
Right, let's move into the realms of the slightly surreal. S. Simba says, I've heard through the grapevine that Trump is going to give the state of California to Sikhs to create Khalistan there and they can live there happily ever after in the Californian sunshine. Well, why not? We do know there is a very large Sikh diaspora in California. And indeed, I've been fortunate and lucky enough to have met several of them. And welcome and hello to our Californian viewers. But Neelam Sharma goes a step further. I'm not quite sure how serious this comment was. I'm so happy. I hope they'll be given part of America and Canada. Well, unfortunately, James, I think in reality, Khalistan isn't going to happen in California, much as, well, put it this way, if California did become Khalistan, I think even I would move there, James, to see that Californian sunshine and beaches.
There you go. And if you've ever been to Surrey, British Columbia, we almost have Khalistan here, so it's beautiful. It's great.
Indeed. And Jasvinder Kere says, invite Sikh youngsters into Canadian, British and American Army and create a battalion. Unemployment in the Punjab is high. This is a really interesting comment. Now, where to begin? This is a huge subject and we don't have time really to dig into it as much as I would love to. I think it's a fascinating subject, this. The army has traditionally been a great place to solve the unemployment problem. If you've got lots of unemployed young men, they tend to quite often get into mischief. You know, they've got lots of time on their hands. They're men of testosterone fueled. They need to do something with their time. They need to find excitement, fulfill that adrenaline surge. So what better place than the army? Absolutely. And quite often they do make very, very good soldiers. Now, the British Army does actually contain, I forget the numbers, it's about 140 odd Sikh soldiers who have served with absolute distinction. I had the privilege actually of meeting one of them in London a couple of months ago. Had a long chat with him, had a really good discussion with him about Sikhs in the British Army. Unfortunately, there is no Sikh battalion in the British Army. There is no Sikh regiment. There used to be, but unfortunately there no longer is. And I think this is to both the loss and the weakness of the British Army. And I think it's a bit of a stain on the British Army. I think it really does need to have a Sikh regiment and certainly a Sikh battalion. And Canada and the US, I think likewise. I don't think you do have Sikh regiments. I'm pretty sure to say you don't have Sikh regiments, but I think that's a fantastic idea, James.
Absolutely. As you said, it's something that's been there in the past that, isn't there anymore. And I think that part of that comes from the DEI of trying to just incorporate everybody into one battalion, as opposed, not literally one battalion, but just the integration of everyone as a group and as a whole. And, and it is a good idea to get them in there. They're young, they're full of energy, they know everything that's important in the world. And as we get older, we don't have that adrenaline, we don't have that energy, and we don't remember half the shit we thought we knew when we were teenagers.
How very true, how very true. But what I would sort of finish this comment off with is actually, come the days of Khalistan, of course, there will be a Khalistan army, which will, of course, be made up of Sikhs and, of course, other ethnicities, other religious backgrounds will join the Khalistan army, I've no doubt. They will be very welcome to join that army. But what I would say, it is very likely that army will both be highly resourced, because I'm sure there will be financial support from the West, particularly the US, who I think will have their own vested interest in promoting a Sikh army, Air Force, Navy, well, I say Navy, they've got, obviously, they don't need a Navy, but certainly a Sikh army. And that army is likely, because of the basic genes of the Sikh community are so inherently, have such a strong history in being a warrior race. It has a fantastic history and its background. Of course, back to the days of the Empire and how it stood up to the British Empire so successfully for so long. I think it's very likely the Khalistan army will likely be one of the most highly trained, most highly skilled and most highly effective military military forces on the planet. And I would draw a parallel, to example, to the Israeli army, very small in size but extraordinarily and disproportionately powerful, well-trained and effective. I think the Khalistan army will be one of the elite forces on the planet. I really look forward to that day, James.
As long as their weapons aren't made in China, they'll be good.
I think it's very likely that they certainly will not be. Right, a very interesting and very long comment from Sikh Azadi. Again, in the interest of time, we don't have time to read it verbatim, but I just want to pick out some key points here. Some very interesting and important points brought out in this. To summarise that first paragraph, basically what Sikh Azadi is saying, we need to be very careful who the Sikh community aligns with. Now, we have aligned to some degree with Trump and Trump's politics. He says, I understand the need to play politics and alliances with Trump, but does he really care about Sikhs, or is he just playing games? And again, this is back to Trump being a businessman. He'll do what is in the best interest of Trump and what is in the best interest of America as a whole. Now, that might align with the Sikh community, but it might not always align with the Sikh community. So what Sikh Azadi is saying is, look, let's just be a little bit more careful. Let's be a little bit more circumspect about this, because it may not be the case always in the future that the Sikh community's interests will always align with Trump's interests. So I think he's saying that just be a bit careful here. Let's just take a step back and be a bit more circumspect, which I think is very sage, very wise advice. And neoliberal, both Republicans and Democrats, or Conservatives and Labour, they don't care about the common man. This comes actually back to what I was just talking earlier, James. And the point here is saying, look, their main concern is how they can make money, how they can create wars so they can supply arms forever, like, for example, to Israel. Ukraine is another example of this. Whilst we need support for our cause from Western powers, don't embarrass ourselves by begging or losing our values, morals, etc. In other words, we shouldn't sell our principles just to essentially to support Western powers. Which I think is a very, very important point here. And I think this is highlighting the point that there is this, let's call it for simple terms, the ruling elite, the political class who are in it for the money and power. Yeah, it's the 1 in 10 argument I often say, that if you take an average 10 human beings, one of those 10 will be genetically disposed. They cannot help themselves but want to control and rule over the others and suckle the resources, wealth, money and power from the other 9 of the group. And I think those 1 in 10 are, let's call them in simple terms, the ruling elite. They become the politicians, they become the ruling class, they become these people that start wars, that generate wars, because wars are good for business, good for generating wealth, and that wealth is sucked up to that ruling class. And I think that is what has created this new era to some degree, whereas, and it's almost going back to feudalist times, James, where we've got the feudal overlords and then we've got the peasants who are struggling to make a living and actually serving this ruling class. And I think that's where, again, the political barriers are breaking down, because I think under the feudalism, we're all waking up to this fact, James, that we are increasingly having a ruling class. And that's what we need to be aware of, James.
Absolutely, Angus, and I do definitely agree that there needs to be some trepidation in dealing with Trump and knowing where his alliances lie, because it definitely isn't with the Sikh community if it doesn't align with his views tomorrow, as they seem to change so rapidly. Of course, I'll be careful what I say here, because I am not a big Trump fan, or even just not even a little bit. But I also have concern about the bootlickers that are out there when it comes to politicians on all sides who are cowering down and just being subservient to Trump instead of making sure that they hold him accountable. And that's what worries me at the end of the day, is accountability or the lack thereof. And when he is there, I hope it doesn't happen, but when he turns on the Sikh community, just be careful, because again, there's not going to be those controls. There's not going to be accountability for him screwing anybody over. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's very relevant to this comment as well. I think we have very deliberately gifted an enormous amount of power to Trump. He's come in, he's swept in on a wave of support, on a wave of jubilation, because finally, the people who have not had a voice for so long finally have found somebody who's giving them a voice, who's actually representing their views. So he's been gifted an enormous, almost unprecedented amount of power. He's got both houses now under his remit. He's got the Supreme Court now in power. So he actually has the ability, the capability to to do God knows what. And I think you're right, James. Accountability is key here. We must watch Trump like a hawk. And I'm going to go back to the 1930s here, and I'm not going to draw a comparison between Trump and Hitler. That's stupid. But I want to draw the comparison of what can happen. In the 1930s in Germany, Hitler swept to power on the same sort of level of wave of support, of jubilation, on nationalistic pride. This was fantastic. He was gifted, Hitler was gifted, again, an unprecedented amount of power, which everyone was happy. Yeah, we trust him. It was only when it went to his head and he lost, that accountability was lost. He ran out of control. And when, by the time people realised that he actually didn't represent what they thought he represented, he was in fact an evil dictator, he was a fascist, it was too late. And again, this is why we must always keep our eye on Trump, because well, James, you know, I'm generally speaking a supporter of Trump, but that's not to say I'm watching him like a hawk, because if he steps over that line of accountability, it's going to be very different from certainly this camp here. It's saying, whoa, no. We've given you this power to do what we want you to do good, but you step over that line into unaccountability, you take it too far, that's when we will start reining you back in. That's when democracy needs to kick back in, and we need to watch him like a hawk. Again, that's the foundations of democracy. We need to hold our governments to account, and if they step out of line, we can change what they do. We can bring them down. That's what India is losing, unfortunately, but that's what we have the danger of, certainly in the States with Trump. We need to watch him like a hawk. I support him now, we all support him now, but if he steps over that line, that's when we need to be very, very careful, James.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, a politician can give the people their voice and let them scream as loud and encourage them to scream as loud as they want. But unless they take the earplugs out of their ear canals, it really doesn't make a difference because they're not listening at the end of the day. So again, that's where the accountability factor is essential.
Indeed. So, Sikh Azadi, I hope that answers your question. You did ask our views on that. You did rightly say Khalistan means land of the pure. Please don't forget that. Well, of course, we do say that regularly. And you asked to talk more about Khalsa Aid and other Sikh charities doing great work around the world. Well, actually, we do. And I hope you are a regular watcher, and you will see that we do quite often talk about Khalsa Aid and lots of Sikh charities doing wonderful selfless service around the world. And we will continue to do that, James.
Absolutely, and most recently we spoke about the different Khalsa Aid and the United Sikhs and others that are working diligently to help those impacted by the California wildfires. So for the rest of our viewers, if you have forgot or not been aware, you can go onto those group websites and make a donation if you wish to help with the fire relief efforts that are still going on in California through United Sikhs, through the Khalsa Aid and so forth. So.
Indeed. And I want to swiftly move on to our Critics' Corner, which makes a triumphant return again today, delighted to say, with Anjan, who says, look, the question is, did Trump admin invite those Khalistani folks, of course that's Sikhs for Justice, to his inauguration ball, or do they come like other American citizens? Well, I can say, actually, there's no way they weren't invited without a very good reason. Those tickets were golden tickets. A lot of people wanted those tickets, so I can absolutely assure you they did not gate crash that ball. And but then you continue to say that the majority of American Sikhs reject Khalistan. Well, I find that quite interesting, because how do you know that? If you look at all the those who turned up to the Khalistan referendum, which a very large proportion of American Sikhs have turned up to the Khalistan referendum, I think the majority of them, James, were carrying Khalistan flags. I think it's fair to say. And then you continue to say, sorry, I'll come to you in a second, James, to finish this comment off. Khalistan means land of the pure. Yeah, Sikhs are far from being pure. Well, I think that's a little bit offensive to say that. But ultimately, we're all human beings. Sikhs are only human beings. Yeah, not all of them are totally pure. I think as the Christian phrase goes, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. So none of us are pure, unfortunately, James.
Absolutely. And no matter what culture, no matter what community, no matter what country you go to, you're going to have the good and the bad. And that's just the game of numbers, right? And as for whether or not they were personally invited by Trump, I don't know if they were personally invited. My understanding is that they were invited by the Trump administration. Whether there's basis to that, I personally cannot confirm, because Trump will not take my phone calls for some reason.
And Ash Shah sort of has a go at you and me, James. New YouTubers wanted to get support and viewers from the anti-India lobby, so to make ends meet, nothing else. So I think that's an accusation saying that, well, we're not that new. We've been around for quite a while. Clearly, you must be a new viewer, but we've been established for quite a while as a channel, and it's not really to make ends meet. If you do watch our show in detail, you'll see that James and I are actually pretty motivated and pretty passionate about what we talk about. If we were just basically reading a script, then yeah, maybe we could be open to those accusations. If you watch our podcast, you'll see that we actually have pretty intelligent discussions about this whole subject. So I think it's slightly, I would say, a little bit misinformed, your comment. And I think your accusation is without foundation. But you do also say, you also speak about Northern Ireland and Scotland asking for independence. Well, again, if you're a regular viewer, you will see that I often talk about Scottish independence, and I draw a comparison between the Scottish nationalist movement here in the UK, and James often talks about the Quebec independence movement, and we compare it to India and the Khalistan movement there, and the comparison is very clear. Here in democratic countries like the UK and Canada, they've been given a referendum. They are allowed to campaign loudly, vocally, out on the streets. They wave their flags. They're not imprisoned. They're not brutalised or persecuted. They are welcomed into our news shows. They are interviewed on mainstream television about their views in a balanced way. Do you get that in India? No, you don't. What happens to Khalistani campaigners in India? They get locked up. Look at Amrit Pal Singh and many others who now reside in Dibrugarh jail. So, James, unfortunately, I think, again, probably not a regular viewer, just throwing a random accusation and criticism at us.
Absolutely, Angus. But they also have to keep in mind that, we have an audience. We have what they expect in terms of what we're here for and what our purpose is. I mean, I'm not going to go on to, adult websites like Pornhub to watch a speech from the Pope. I mean, it's just, it's about knowing your audience and what the channel is there for. So again, but yeah, we do talk about different areas and different regions, and especially the right for anybody anywhere to hold a referendum or to have that opinion of sovereignty and to separate or become independent. So yeah, we support the process, the democratic process, and that at the end of the day is what it's all about for Khalistan.
Indeed, and I would say to Ash Shah, actually, I was in Scotland and voted in that independence referendum. Yes, I can talk about it legitimately because I lived in Scotland at that time and I voted in that referendum. I don't talk about Northern Ireland because I very deliberately steer away from that subject because I don't understand it. It's too complex, it's too historic, and I would be speaking complete ignorance about that subject. I just leave that to better qualified people to talk about Northern Ireland. That's a very difficult subject to talk about with qualifications. So yeah, all I would say to you, Ash Shah, keep watching the channel. If you watch us, you might actually learn something. You might actually learn more about what we're about. And who knows, we might even persuade you to join our cause. Do let us know your thoughts on that, Ash Shah. And final set of comments, James. Vinnie Chorn. The useless United Nations. It can't even resolve Gaza or Kashmir. And then you say Hindus won't allow any partition of our beloved country. This almost made it into Critics' Corner, but I thought, you know what, I'll do Vinnie Chorn a favour. No, not a critic. This is a general comment. What I would agree with you, actually, the United Nations has proved pretty ineffective in many cases, unfortunately. But we do need something, and it's probably about as good as it's ever going to get. And yeah, it has failed. I admit, I agree with you on this. I think at times it has been proven to be pretty useless. But we do need something that does represent the United Nations, and I think that's probably about as good as we can get. But Hindus won't allow any partition of our beloved country. This is an interesting one. Actually, I think you may find the Hindu imperialists, the Hindu nationalist extremists, I say to them, look, it is in your interest that India breaks up, because then in one move you can get rid of all your opposition. You can have your Hindu Rashtra. Let Kashmir break away. Let Khalistan break away. Let Manipur or Tamil Nadu break away. All these other parts, these peripheral parts. You take central India. You have your cow belt. You can claim yourselves as your own Hindu nation. You've got exactly what you want. I don't understand why you don't do that. Instead of trying to forcibly enrapture the peripheral parts of what is India into your Hindu Rashtra. Why do that? Why cause yourself all that much pain and all that much misery of people unhappy to be part of your Hindu Rashtra when you can have your Hindu Rashtra? Get rid of all the minorities. Let them have their own nations around in their different regions. Yeah, there you go. That, to me, James, that's just the most simple solution. I don't understand why the Hindu extremists just don't argue for that.
Exactly. And just think, as we've said many times before, Angus, is that imagine the power, the strength, and the unity if those different regions in India became sovereign and independent, but also built, say, out of another name is, an India... a united India party where everybody still has that union together to be a big bloc for a trade partner, defense, and all of that. So I think there's such huge advantages to giving regions independence there, but also working together instead of just breaking apart completely.
And I do often think if I could engage with a lot of the leadership of the Khalistan movement and say, look, strategically, there's an angle here that you should be exploiting. Because, as this commenter says, Hindus won't allow partition of our beloved country unless there's something in it for them. If you can actually, and maybe this is the argument that should be adopted, is look, you can have your Hindu Rashtra. We will help you have your Hindu Rashtra. All you need to do is carve away Khalistan and other parts that want to be independent, and we'll support you. We will support you in your Hindu Rashtra, and you get what you want. Okay, geographically it won't be as large as maybe as you want it, but ultimately you get your Hindu nation, your pure Hindu nation. It's there for the taking. So you actually making it easy for the RSS, the Hindu extremists. Say, we will campaign for a Hindu Rashtra on your behalf because it actually everybody's a winner. Khalistanis get Khalistan, the Hindu extremists get Hindustan, or whatever you want to call it. That, to me, is an angle that they should be exploiting. But anyway, James, let's move on to our final two comments. And talking about Khalistan, Harry Singh says, I support Khalistan because Sikhs have a right to Khalistan. Absolutely they do, from every possible angle that we often argue about on every show. And Happy U13 says, Mr. James and Mrs. Scott, it's great to watch your show. Well, it's great to receive your comment. Thank you. Your smiles and views make my day, James. We make Happy's day. I hope we make more people's days, James.
And I love it. It's like somebody else that commented that's not up on the screen that they love hearing us laugh at Chandra Arya. So, hey, no problem. We loved laughing at him too. So.
Indeed we do, absolutely. And as Happy says, signs off to say Khalistan soon, absolutely. And indeed, I have, and James and I both believe strongly and passionately that Khalistan is there for the taking. It's there in the foreseeable future. Absolutely. Happy U13. Thank you for that comment. And thank you to each and every one of you for all your comments, which have, of course, been pouring in. We do read every single one of them. We do appreciate all of them. Yes, even the critical ones that always give us a bit of a chuckle, or even the counter narratives, which we're always happy to take on and discuss in a friendly and banter style fashion. It's great for us. We do love it. So do keep them coming. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention directly that you don't want to put in the public domain. But until next time, that is another Perspectives show over for the day. Thank you so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.